In Kentucky, where the Cumberland River picturesquely wends its way, we recall that it was the fertile valley of this stream that attracted the early settlers to establish their homes in the bluegrass state. The first state west of the Allegheny Mountains to be admitted into the Union. This historic river rises in southeastern Kentucky and flows for about 700 miles before it empties into the Ohio River. And among its scenic vicissitudes, none is more picturesque than Cumberland Falls. Kentucky has a population of over 2.5 million inhabitants, and the majority of them live on farms and depend upon farm produce for their livelihood. One of the most famous landmarks in the state is Fort Harrod at Harrodsburg, a pioneer stronghold which provided the earliest white settlers with refuge and protection from the Indians. This quaint structure is a duplicate of the original. In an old burial ground near the fort lie the mortal remains of the first white child born in Kentucky, as well as many of the courageous pioneers who gave their lives in defense of their families during the Indian Wars. This monument is dedicated to the memory of Henry Clay, one of the foremost political leaders of the country, who endeared himself to Americans by his excessive patriotism and his persuasive oratory. Even before Clay's activity in Kentucky, Daniel Boone, famous for his courage and ability as an Indian fighter, marked the wilderness trail through the Cumberland Gap, and his grave today is one of the noted shrines of the bluegrass state. Perhaps the most famous landmarks in the state of Kentucky are the little log cabin at Bardstown, the duplicate of the one in which Stephen Collins Foster composed his immortal song, My Old Kentucky Home, and the home itself, which stands nearby. It was while visiting relatives here that Foster was inspired to compose his masterpiece, which now associates itself with every old homestead in Kentucky.
Weep no more, my lady. Oh, weep no more today. We will sing one song for my old Kentucky home, for my old Kentucky home far away.
Although Stephen Foster was not a Southerner by birth, his immortal songs were inspired by the Old South and its colored folks.
Oh, I hear the gentle voices calling home, Black Joe.
The breeding of thoroughbred horses is a tradition in the state of Kentucky, and almost from the time the average child is able to walk, he is taught to ride a horse. It is not unusual, therefore, to find entire families literally born to the saddle. Most of Kentucky's original settlers were of English, Scotch, and Scotch-Irish descent, and they brought with them an innate love for horses, which has become a cherished tradition in the bluegrass state. After a brisk ride, there is nothing quite as refreshing as the ever-popular mint julep, made and served in the good old Southern fashion. In the picturesque paddocks of Kentucky, one may see an interesting variety of horses, standard bred and thoroughbred. Although a vast majority of Kentucky's better horses are bred for racing purposes, a number of them are reared for farm work. And in this connection, splendid specimens may be found at Spindletop Farm near Lexington. These famous Percherons were regarded as the finest examples of their species in North America. They are a breed of draft horses originating in Perche, an old district of France. In interesting contrast with this huge Percheron is the fascinating trotter who still holds a conspicuous place on the racetracks of Kentucky.
She was bred in old Kentucky where the meadow bluegrass grows, and her coat is soft and silky like the petal of a rose. She was bred in old Kentucky, and her elders mighty lucky, and she lived where the bluegrass grows.
And here is the chief of Spindletop, an American saddlebred prize winner with 5 distinctive gaits and one of the longest tails ever grown by a horse. On Faraway Farm, we see the colts of the Wonder Horse, Man o' War, who has been a great success in the breeding paddocks as a sire of many of the champions on the tracks today. 21 colts were sired by Man o' War in a recent year, and the total value of these yearlings was estimated at $1 million. And now let us meet Man o' War himself. Affectionately known as Big Red, this famous horse in his day was proclaimed as the greatest that ever ran on American turf, and many track records were shattered by him. In Kentucky, great horses, like great men, are revered after death as they were during life. And among the graves of famous horses at Elmendorf Farm, we find those of Fair Play and Mahuba, father and mother of the great Man o' War. Overlooking these graves is the statue of Fair Play, a fitting symbol of Kentucky's regard for its famous horses and the traditions of the turf.